Winter Latina Show.
Hosted by IDM.
And yes, we are not live. We are recording today again. How are you doing, Nina?
I'm doing well. Once again, we're coming from the past into the future, but not too far into the future, just a couple of days. Welcome to another fun-filled installment of the Winter Latina Show, where we discuss, well, today we'll be discussing politics, and I'm super, super excited about today's guest. Of course, I'm always excited about our guests, but in this particular case, this is someone whose work I've been following for probably about a decade, since around the beginning of the conflict in Donbass. We have Mateusz Piskorski, who is a political scientist from Poland. He is also a journalist. He has an extensive academic background in political science. He speaks at least 3 languages, as far as I can tell, very well, probably more. So he's also a polyglot. He's been a columnist and an editor of, I'm going to butcher this, I'm going to say this with a Russian accent, Myśl Polska, Polish Thought. He also works with, in English, it's called Without Censorship. It's a channel. So he sort of wears many hats. So I'm really, really excited about talking to him, maybe covering Russian topics. Obviously, we'll talk about Russian-Polish relations. We'll talk about the conflict in Ukraine and anything else that is relevant to sort of this general geographic and political area. But it would be great, Marcelo, if you can bring him on, and I would like for him to introduce himself.
Of course, without further ado, hello, Mr. Mateusz. How are you doing, sir?
Hello. How do you do? Well, thank you for your invitation. And first and foremost, I am a modest political scientist from a small country, Poland.
Well, this is a very modest introduction, and I'm pretty sure that some members of my audience, especially on X, formerly Twitter, may be familiar with your work, especially if they've been following the situation with Crimea a decade ago, with Donbass, et cetera, general relations in Eastern Europe, perhaps even the Baltic. But for those of them who are watching us right now, who are not familiar with your work, could you please briefly describe what you've focused on in the past, what you're working on right now, so they can have a better idea of your specialization?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a political scientist, which means that I'm trying to analyze some different geopolitical processes. I'm into international relations, and of course, my main focus is Eurasia as such, and particularly, let's say, the post-Soviet area, as well as my part of Europe, which means the Central European countries. But I used also to write a lot about anti-system or non-establishment political movements and parties. A long time ago, I used to be a member of one of such parties in my country, in Poland, and for a short period of time, I was a member of Parliament of Poland, but it was, almost 20 years ago. And nevertheless, then I left politics and active political life. I focused on analysis. And then I tried to register a small political party, anti-establishment political party here in Poland. But unfortunately, it was my mistake, which means I actually wanted to register, to organize a party which was called by us the first non-American party in Poland, in contemporary Poland, which means not anti-American, but just non-American, which means realizing Polish national interests. Yes, but of course the party was not registered, And well, I was put in jail. I was detained for 3 years, almost 3 years, without 2 days, because of my activities in the, let's say, anti-system, anti-establishment opposition here in Poland. And then after my release in 2019, after the interventions of Human Rights Commissioner of United Nations, I focused more on media activities. As you mentioned, I'm running a small YouTube channel without censorship, Wbrew Cenzurze in Polish, and Wapryki Cenzurie in Russian, because it's published in 3 different languages. And I'm also one of the editors of Polish Told. Yes, you perfectly spoke without any Russian accent. The Myśl Polska, the name of the weekly newspaper, which is one of the oldest weekly newspapers published continuously since 1941. So since the Second World War. First, it was published in London, and since the beginning of the 90s, it has been published in Poland, in Warsaw. So I'm working a lot on media projects and trying to analyze the current geopolitical processes. I'm also trying to publish some interesting books. I'm working on my own books, but I'm also translating a lot of books of interesting authors, like, for instance, Professor Kees van der Pijl from the Netherlands, the author of a book about the Malaysian Bank, which went down in Donbass in 2014, and then I'm publishing also some books by Aleksander Dugin in Polish, Professor Aleksander Dugin from Russia, of course, which is, let's say, a victim of censorship, not only in the United States. As far as I know, Amazon doesn't sell his books, for instance, but also here in Poland. So we are trying to do everything to preserve a small, let's say, a small territory of a free words, of a free speech in my country, and that's the thing I'm focusing on.
Well, I think you're very modest in your introduction. Thank you for trying to cover all of your endeavors. Where I can relate to you is I have translated one book by Dugin into English, and since then the English language media calls me the main translator of Dugin in English, which is, you know,
congratulations.
I know. It only takes one. I mean, he has dozens. So it's been a very interesting experience as being branded as such by people who obviously use that type of terminology in a very hostile way. So you covered a lot of ground. I really would like to discuss your detention, but before we get into that, let's ask a very simple question. Which do you prefer? Do you prefer being a journalist, a publicist, an editor, or if given the chance, would you return to politics? Or is that just too dirty a field to operate in?
Well, that's a very tricky question because, being a politician, it's possible, and it's quite interesting, even fascinating, if you live in a country observing fundamental democratic standards. If you live in, I'm not talking about Poland only, but since the 90s, I mean, I was brought up, let's say, in the 90s, I was reading a lot of then mainstream newspapers and media, and they tried to, after the transformation, the fall of the Eastern Bloc and so on, they tried to, in the mainstream media, they tried to convince us that now we have freedom of speech, we have democracy, and so on and so on. And by the way, this was a kind of liberal moment in all Eastern European and Central European countries. I mean, actually, you could establish even a small movement or party, you could participate in the elections and so on. But after, let's say, some people in the United States, in the Anglo-Saxon world, realized that the unipolar moment is going to be finished. They Well, they decided even not to pretend that we have any kind of democratic standards, and I mean, no one is now pretending that Poland or other countries is a democratic or liberal democratic country. You have the restrictions. You have the so-called, I mean, political scientists call it the securitization of the public sphere. You know? So it started, of course, you know it better than me because it started, by the way, actually in the United States on 11th of September, after 11th of September 2001, yeah, with the Patriot Act and so on and so on. But then, of course, the whole trend expanded to all satellite states or protectorates of the Anglo-Saxon controlled or dominated sphere, including Central European countries. So now, in times of securitization of the public sphere, you have to acknowledge and understand that, well, it's useless to to even think about participating in elections in all our countries here. Because, you even won't be registered. Yes. So even on the level of the registration, you will be rejected by the system. That's the smallest and softest thing which could happen to you. Yeah. Where I can tell about my example, of course, but I have a lot of friends. Well, actually, the leader of my former party, the Self-Defense of the Republic of Poland, that was the name of the party, Andrzej Leper, was probably killed in 2011 because of his knowledge about the secret CIA prisons located in the territory of Poland. Yes, so and he was a former deputy prime minister and so on. So such things happen in Central Europe, but also in other countries. So I'm not so naive now to talk about political activity or creating a new political party or movement. It's not a good moment for that. I'm focusing more, and I prefer focusing on, let's say, meta-political activities, on media activities, because here we still have a niche, a small place just to before we get deplatformed and cancelled. Yes, we still have this small area, and we can reach a few people, a few thousands of people. And, from the realist point of view, I think it's now more reasonable.
That makes sense. So paradoxically, I would say there's a little bit more freedom of speech in the United States than there is from what you're describing in the European Union and perhaps in Central Europe, at least anecdotally from watching certain crackdowns happening in Europe. But what was the official rationale for not allowing the registration of the party? I'm just curious. Was it insufficient signatures? And usually there's some kind of a very surface-based reason why something like that wouldn't be allowed. You're saying it's sort of the least worst thing that could happen, but I'm curious what rationale could they use to not allow the registration?
Well, just 1 or 2 days after we have submitted the signatures to register the party, all the documents were thoroughly analyzed and read by the Polish Secret Service. We have a confirmation from the court that they were just reading it, coming there and reading it. And also there were some sittings of National Security Council of Poland. They openly told that, we cannot agree for creating such kind of a political movement or a party. So it was quite publicly and openly stated that they won't register us, but the official formal reason for the rejection of our documents was, of course, the lack of signatures. Yes? So it's quite normal. Actually, they have stated and claimed that we have falsified our signatures. Yes.
Oh, wow.
You know what's funny? That then it occurred that they accused me of falsifying my own signature and the signature of my family members. Yes.
Oh,
So that was quite ironically, that was quite funny, but this is a usual method. Yes, they
you have
just
to have quite a bit of dark humor to laugh at something like that, I think,
yeah.
which sounds like you do. So
But
it seems. Go ahead.
no, we got used to that. Yes, so there are a lot of movements, political parties who tried, for instance, to register their candidates in different on different levels of elections. Yes, and their signatures are also rejected. So the whole system of signatures, yes, gives you an opportunity if you are in the system, within the system, to block any kind of opposition. Actually, yes.
So are these opposition parties along the lines of the party you try to register? Are they sort of Poland first? So we don't want any influence coming from the US. We don't want any influence coming from Russia. Is it basically focused on Poland? Is this the type of politics that is being rejected by the mainstream?
Yes, of course, because if you are claiming that you have a political program for a sovereign Poland in sovereign Europe, and I have to stress here that our party, contrary to a lot of political parties which are more or less anti-establishment in Europe, our party was not anti-European, which means we also of course we criticize European Union, yeah, but nevertheless we supported the idea of united Europe and claimed that Europe is not European Union. Europe is an idea, a kind of cultural, metapolitical idea of continental cooperation and integration. Yeah? We just rejected the hegemony of United States, or to be honest, maybe not only United States, but basically the Atlantist modes and rules. Yeah? And we did that explicitly. We called for stepping out from NATO, which was a shock for the Polish public opinion, because actually we're the first party to do that non-registered party, but anyway, first group of people, organized group of people who openly told about that. And it was back in 2015, so it was during the conflict in Donbass, of course. And actually, some of us already, maybe we didn't know that, of course, but according to our prognosis, to our analysis, the things which we are witnessing now, the war, of course, in Ukraine, was something inevitable, yeah, from our point of view. And we spoke about that loudly publicly, that they are trying to drag us into the war and so on, that the war will start there. I personally visited Donbass several times. I visited Crimea, so I was also kind of a witness, yes, of what was going on there in the post-Soviet area. Nevertheless, we warned that this might end up in a huge war in Europe, which will put in danger not only, let's say, Ukraine, but also my country, Poland. So that was the main point. Of course, if you tell such things publicly in Poland, you are immediately accused of being a Russian spy or agent. Yes, so that's something natural. You are not entitled to say such things publicly. That was the reason. That was the reason of rejecting the registration of the party. That was the reason of my detention and so on.
So what is maybe excluding the question of NATO that you said was shocking, what is the level of public support that you can gauge for ideas of Polish sovereignty, sort of no influence from the Atlantist side, no influence from Russia, but sort of having a sovereign Poland? Do younger people support this? What do you see this question as?
Well, I can only tell about my impressions, because there were no opinion polls about that. More, I would say that Since 1999, because Poland became a member of NATO back in 1999. I think even then in 1999, there were no opinion polls about that. Of course, there was no any referendum on that issue. There were just three members of parliament who voted against.
Oh, wow.
From a small party, and we have 460 MPs in our parliament. Yes. So there was no public discussion about that. There are some dogmas in geopolitics and in foreign policy of Poland, which you cannot question. And even if you would like to have, any kind of opinion polls or analysis or even focus groups, asking about their attitude towards NATO and so on, you won't be able to publish the results. Yes, so even if you have such an opinion poll, that's why I cannot answer this question. But when it comes to my impression, I think that according to what we see when it comes to our viewers now and our readers, there are two groups. One is the elderly people who still remember the times of the Polish People's Republic. It was the name of our state before 1990, actually. And they are quite critical when it comes to their assessment of what has happened here in Poland after the so-called transformation, neoliberal reforms, and so on. And the second group is, of course, the group of younger people, particularly after 2022 when this stage of war started in Ukraine. And of course, they are shocked by the level of propaganda, by the level of censorship. So it's a group of younger people, but also not the youngest ones. Yes, that's very important. It's a group, when it comes, for instance, to our viewers, it's a group of people between, let's say, 35 and 45, something like that. So maybe middle-aged, not young people, but middle-aged.
Sort of older millennials and maybe younger Gen X, I guess is what we would call it in North America. That's really interesting because to me, anecdotally, looking on social media, specifically on X/Twitter, you do see some Polish. They seem to be younger people being critical of the war in Ukraine. Obviously, there's the immediate circumstance of the refugee influx and certain problems that arose from that. And some people seem to be critical of propaganda. But, this is just my very personal observation. So I don't know the scope and scale of that type of sentiment. But there does seem to be that disconnect between the official policy and sort of the rumblings, maybe at the grassroots. But who knows how broad they are? You probably know better, of course. But
well, you are right. But on the other hand, we do not have. I mean, we ourselves here in Poland, we are not skilled enough when it comes to using such social media as TikTok, for instance. Yes, because I have children at that age. Yes, so I can see what they are watching and so on. Yes, and I know that they watch only short movies like the YouTube Shorts or TikTok. And we are, our generation, at least my generation, is unable to formulate the short messages they prefer. Yes, that's a big problem, of course, because I think actually that there are a lot of anti-establishment young people. Usually the youngs are anti-establishment more or less. Yeah. So, but we don't have the key. The key to access them when it comes to the social media.
Interesting. So could you please give us some more information about you said you were a witness in Crimea, in Donbass. What was sort of the more specific context? Was it election monitoring? Was it just going there for journalistic purposes? And when did you travel to, it sounds like it was sort of the, after the Maidan, but maybe at the onset of the first stage of the war.
Well, first and foremost, I used to visit Kiev very often before February or even March 2014. And well, when it comes to Maidan, yes, I mean, actually, I was in Kiev as well in 2004. So during the first
Orange Revolution,
Orange
right.
Revolution, of course. And at that time, I have noticed the presence of the so-called color revolution experts organizing or even coordinating something. That was by incident. I mean, I was just going to a small restaurant in the center of Kiev back in 2004. It was the Orange Revolution, yeah, that time, and I met there a group of Serbs. I love Serbian people, but those Serbs were from the Canvas group. The group who, I think it was the first group who followed the instructions of the famous books and works by Gina Sharp about organizing color revolutions. Yes, a kind of handbook for color revolutions. Yes, so they were coordinating the protests. I remember it was quite interesting for me watching that. Then after 10 years, of course, I visited Ukraine several times. I was there during the presidential elections back in 2010 when Yanukovych won the elections. Actually, I can reveal you one secret here. Where I was one of the first with my delegation of observers. I was one of the first to congratulate then President Viktor Yanukovych, the newly elected president. And who was sitting in his cabinet in one of the hotels in the center of Kiev?
I'm afraid to guess wrong, but I'm very curious.
Rinat Akhmetov,
of course,
the
man who pulled the strings. Yeah, for those who may not know, this is one of the major oligarchs from specifically Eastern Ukraine, who controlled a lot of them.
He was the real winner of the elections. I mean, at least he felt himself as a winner. I remember that. I was there. And then, of course, Yanukovych made a lot of mistakes. Because, by the way, my idea is that you cannot organize a color revolution without a social basis, without social crisis, a real one. Mm-hmm. So there was, the main mistake of Yanukovych and his people was, of course, that they tried to, let's say, not nationalize. They tried simply to steal the property of the oligarchs like Akhmetov and consorts who supported him. I mean, Yanukovych, at a certain moment, Yanukovych decided to create his own oligarch group or to become an oligarch together with his son. And
not so much nationalize, but basically just reappropriate and move.
Just grab it, of course. So that was his mistake. And the second mistake was the basic mistake of the whole Ukrainian statehood, which means that it was built up on a kind of compromise, different kinds of compromise. I'm always saying that this state existed thanks first and foremost to a kind of oligarchic compromise. You had different oligarch groups who, let's say, divided the country into their spheres of influence, divided the national capital and industry between themselves after the fall of the Soviet Union. And this was a very fragile compromise between them. Secondly, you had the, let's say, political compromise, which meant that periodically you had a president from, let's say, the western part of the country, but then you had a president from the eastern part of the country. Yeah? And then you had a kind of symbolic historical compromise, which was also very important. It's about the monuments, for instance. In the eastern part of Ukraine, you had the monuments of Lenin. In the western part of the country, you had the monuments of Bandera, of the leader of the nationalism, ultra-nationalist Ukrainian collaborators with the Nazi Third Reich. Yes? And this compromise functioned for, almost 14 years. when one of the parts of this internal conflict, of this internal division, of this cleavage, we would say the social cleavage within Ukraine, decided to strive for total dominance there in Ukraine, the statehood of Ukraine had to collapse. I mean, it was something very logical at that time. So it started then. Of course, I also mentioned that I was there in Kiev in 2014. So I visited. As a journalist, I went to the Maidan, for instance. So I perfectly know how much those people got per day by organizing and participating in the protests. So it was purely commercial, by the way.
Wow.
There's no ideology in Ukraine, in the Ukrainian protests. Yes, everything is 100% commercial on a commercial basis. Yes, everyone paid. I mean, all the parties paid, not only the ones who organized the color revolutions. Yes, but all the others as well. Then I noticed in the center of Kiev, because firstly in November, December 2013. When I came there, there were students, with waving European Union flags and so on. After 1 or 2 months, the European Union flags were replaced by the neo-Nazi flags and the ultra-nationalist flags and so on. I had even some, pro-European friends from Kiev who were organizing trade unions there. For some grants from EU and so on, but actually they were beaten and thrown out of Maidan by the ultra-nationalists. Yes? So they took control of everything there, the militant groups, of course. And then it was getting worse and worse. So when I last came to Kiev, I just learned that the headquarters of the Party of Regions of the then ruling party was burned by the protesters, by the ultra-nationalists. One man was killed there. So it started. And then after the coup in Ukraine, I was invited by the Crimean Electoral Commission to observe the referendum, to monitor the referendum in Crimea. And that was also quite interesting for me, of course. Again, by incident, there was a huge group of different politicians from different European countries. And, those politicians could not agree who should be a coordinator and the spokesman of the whole group. There were communists on the one hand from European Union countries. There were, let's say, extreme right-wing, as some claim, from other countries of European Union participating there in the referendum monitoring. And they decided that I'm a kind of compromise figure there. So I'm the only one who could, speak as on behalf of all of them as a coordinator of the whole group. And that was, some people claim that was my mistake. Well,
your Wikipedia article simultaneously describes you as right-wing and left-wing in the same article. It's very schizophrenic. So
yes.
that you were chosen as the compromise between the two. Yeah, I thought that was really
that's why they accepted me, both of them.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, that was some people claim that it was my mistake already. Then they claimed it was my mistake because, actually, in 2016 when I was detained, first and foremost, the Polish Secret Service accused me of organizing and coordinating the group of observers at the illegal referendum in Crimea. So that's the main reason, I guess. That was the main reason of my detention and the repressions and so on. Anyway, after that, I traveled several times to Donbass. I had a very good close friend there who was at that time the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Donetsk People's Republic, Alexander Kaufman. So I visited him several times. By the way, he did a lot at that time on the international level to tell about the situation, just to tell about the situation of the people there in Donbass. And I had also had an opportunity to meet the leader of the Donetsk People's Republic, Alexander Zaharchenko, who was then killed in a terrorist attack in Donetsk. So I tried to analyze the situation there on the ground. Yes, and of course I've noticed that first and foremost, Ukraine actually did not want to reintegrate this territory. That's very important. It was not about the reintegration of Donbass. They didn't want that because they knew perfectly. I mean, they knew illegal, in my opinion, according to the constitution of Ukraine, the new authorities. Poroshenko, Turchinov before him, they perfectly knew that Donbass will always vote for, let's say, not pro-Russian, but Russia-friendly or, let's say, Russian-speaking bloc. Yeah. So they actually, in my opinion, my personal opinion, they always wanted to get rid of them, and that's why they did not hesitate to kill those people. Yes, to kill those people. If you want to reintegrate someone, yes, you do not shoot at civilians there, and that was what they were doing. I mean, the ultra, including the ultra nationalist militias who came there within the so-called anti-terrorist operation, as Kiev called that. So I spoke with a lot of people whose relatives were killed or injured, civilians. I have to stress, I'm talking about civilians there. I saw the cruelty of that conflict, well, I heard the people saying there in Donbass for all those years, I mean, between 2014 and 16, when I went there, that they count on Russia. Some of them even were, let's say, a little bit disappointed with Moscow and the lack of reaction of Moscow on what was happening there. Yes, so I'm not. I mean, Putin and the authorities of Russia were, according to them, too patient for the Ukrainian regime, which came to power in 2014. And then, the history. What happened. That was a kind of logic consequence. Unfortunately, that was a kind of logic consequence of, breaking and violating the Minsk agreements by the Kiev regime and so on and so on. So that was quite predictable, I would say.
It's interesting that in those early days, you did have more reasonable media coverage coming from mainstream Western media, even CNN, in that the first couple of months of the so-called anti-terrorist operation, they did cover the bombing of Lugansk, for instance, in a reasonable way, in addition to major human rights groups documenting it. So it wasn't like this veil of censorship that we've seen since 2022, for instance, where that conflict was completely wiped from public memory, and it's more difficult to find this information unless you know what to look for. So that was interesting to me. You raised several questions that I'd like to address. One of them was, do you think this compromise that you described was sort of this ticking time bomb, or was it possible to have the modern state of Ukraine with the compromise, granted that there was maybe a certain level of federalization? And the ideological question, I feel, is the most difficult one, having, like you're saying, Bandera in the West and then having maybe the heroes of World War II in the East. How do you feel about this question?
It's not very pleasant for us Poles to have Bandera.
That was going to be my next question. We literally just covered Bandera on this channel in the previous episode, so I know our audience is very familiar with his story. We actually used the translation of Ales Buzina. You probably know that Ukrainian journalist who was assassinated in 2015. I translated some of his works, and he was a fantastic writer, very sarcastic, but also very historically factual. He really gave you a lot of detail and the sources for his information. So that was going to be my next question. I know that even at the official level, the glorification of Bandera and even worse, collaborators like Shukhevich, for instance, from sort of the late 30s going into the end of World War II, and even after World War II, the Banderite movement was alive and well. This has been one of the major points of contention, even at the public level. How do you perceive this developing? What is the sort of opinion of the man on the street. And then, of course, the government, I think, is relevant here too, the Polish government.
Well, when it comes to your question about the possibility of functioning of Ukrainian statehood within the framework of such compromise, yes, I think it would function. Yes, it would function until now without any problems, even without federalization, because federalization was an idea which came out a little bit later. Yes. But it could function if neither side of the whole conflict would like to dominate. Yes, so I mean, actually, Yanukovych was wise enough, or stupid enough, some say, but I think wise enough not to suppress the boundaries in the western part of Ukraine. Some even claim. Okay, I will reveal another secret. I had some, because it's history already. Yes, I had some meetings with the members of the staff of the Party of Regions, of the governing party in Ukraine, and I know that they actually thought that it would be quite reasonable from a PR point of view and from political marketing point of view for them to even promote some most extreme elements from the nationalist movements. You know, the idea was that in the second round of the presidential elections, Yanukovych would have an opponent in the face of Tyagnibok, then leader of the ultra-nationalist Svoboda party. Yes. That was the most comfortable solution for them when it comes to elections, because they even compared that to France and to French presidential elections, when you had Marine Le Pen or Jean-Marie Le Pen before contesting establishment candidates. Yes. So Yanukovych perceived himself as an establishment, who create a small ultra-nationalist candidate and of course win the elections. So basically, the idea as such was, the idea of historical compromise and symbolic compromise was quite realistic. It could function because, well, we have evidence that they managed to function for almost 25 years without any serious problems, we can say. Nevertheless, of course, it would be unpleasant for us. I stress it would be unpleasant for me as a Pole to see, the monuments of Stepan Bandera, of other war criminals, and people who, according to us, at least according to our Polish history, were guilty of genocide during the Second World War. The genocide committed against our nation, but also against the Russians, against the Jews there, and so on.
And also Ukrainians that were Polish and Russian friendly were not supporting sort of the extreme nationalist element. That's certainly something that Ales Buzina had written, that they were also victims of these ethnic cleansing campaigns in the early 1940s.
Yes, that's very interesting. I mean, every time I'm talking to Ukrainians, I'm trying to remind them some works by different historians. For instance, there was a brilliant historian, Ukrainian historian, living and writing in Canada. We always associate Canadian Ukrainians with, the extreme nationalism and so on, but there were others as well. For instance, it was Viktor Polishchuk, one of the very well-known Ukrainian historians, a professor of history there in Canada, who wrote about the Ukrainian victims, ethnically Ukrainian victims of boundaries. And he estimated that it was several dozens of thousands of people killed there, massacred there. I personally have such a family story. I would say that the brother of my grandmother was living there. He was killed them with his own family. I mean, it was a Polish family, but they were killed. He, his wife, and his children. Wow. And in a neighboring village, there was a young Ukrainian woman, and they have disseminated, I don't know if that was true actually, but they have disseminated some gossips that they had some affair with the brother of my grandmother, and the boundaries killed her as well
Wow.
for having an affair with supposedly having an affair with a Polish guy there. Yes,
It definitely sounds plausible, because I know they went after mixed families that would have been,
course.
Polish Ukrainian families too, because that qualified as the enemy, right? So
there were also Ukrainians who saved the lives of the Polish people there, who risked their lives actually. By hiding, by warning the Polish people that the nationalists are going after them, and so on. So I'm always, in Poland now. Actually, this is an absurd, of course, but in Poland we had several court cases where people who, quite explicitly criticized, even aggressively criticized the boundaries in the social media, were accused of spreading or calling for national hatred.
wow, this is recent.
So some of the Polish prosecutors and politicians as well either claim that there is a new nation, boundaries, because you cannot offend the boundaries now in Poland. You say something against them, you can be prosecuted. Either they claim that either they offend the Ukrainians by calling all the Ukrainians boundaries. Yes, if they say that criticizing boundaries is calling for national hatred. But that's a contemporary thing now. When it comes to the whole history, yes, as a Pole, I would even say that I would be able to live with that. I mean, with the monuments of Bandera in the western parts of Ukraine. That was a sign and kind of evidence of the weakness of my country, of Poland, of course, because historically those lands were Polish, as you know, before the Second World War. But Poland hasn't had and doesn't have at the moment also enough soft power potential to modify, to change softly the worldview, the ideas, the Weltanschauung, let's say, of the people living there. So that's the weakness of my own country. That's how it is now there, and it could function. It could function with anyway peacefully, more or less peacefully, with Bandera there in Lvov, for instance, and Lenin in Donetsk, within the borders of one single country. Unfortunately, someone decided, due to geopolitical reasons, of course, someone decided to create this catastrophe, which is now Ukraine, to create a new Afghanistan in the center of Europe.
Do you feel sort of validated that you and your colleagues were predicting the escalation of this crisis so many years ago? I mean, it's not like a happy validation, because obviously we have a massive death toll in the war that's very much ongoing, and there's now talk of a nuclear possibility. Do you feel a certain level of validation that you were able to forecast something like this?
Yes, but I'm modest enough to claim that it was not only our forecast. I mean, a lot of other political scientists warned about that. Actually, the current CIA director, William Burns, also warned about this. Remember the memoirs of U.S. He was at that time. I mean, before. Was an ambassador of United States to Moscow, and already in 2008, I think, he warned that from the geopolitical point of view, Moscow has some red lines, and purely geopolitically, I'm not talking about the compromise we're speaking about, but purely geopolitically, the war is inevitable if you cross the red lines. Yes, so basically, there were a lot of people who predicted, let's say, that war. Lately, I had an opportunity to talk to some people from the American establishment, from then American establishment. I had an interview with one of the guys from the staff for the policy planning of the Department of State. Now he's a professor in the United States, and well, they were planning that actually. So they knew what the consequences could be, and they wanted all those consequences to happen.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying there was a certain segment of the global elites, I mean, let's call them that, maybe transatlantic elites, that were actually seeking an escalation in this particular geographic area.
Yes, but Moscow, and I was, by the way, lately talking about that in one of my interviews with Alexander Dugin, whom we mentioned here already. My opinion is, and I shared this opinion with him, that Russia could use another means again. So I'm also criticizing Russia for using the means they are using now, for using military means. Yes, I mean,
sure.
You could do that. I know that it's a long-term project and so on, but well, you cannot tell me that Russia could not find $5 billion to invest into the soft power structures in Ukraine, as Victoria Nuland admitted that they were investing around $5 billion, right, dollars in Ukraine, in different NGO structures and so on. Yes, so Russia could do the same, and Russia had even better starting pole position there because it was culturally close. Yes.
Sure. Do you think Russia was distracted by the two Chechen wars at this time? I mean, they went on into the late 2000s and sort of the reconstruction of Russia from the abyss of the 90s. I mean, that's usually the typical argument for why Russia did not focus more on the former Soviet republics that had color revolutions or multiple color revolutions.
You just use the same words as Alexander Dugin did.
Well, this is sort of the mainstream argument. I'm just wondering whether there's some other...
That was his argument as well. Yes, of course. I mean, most of the Russians I speak with are claiming that they were not capable to do that, yes. But nevertheless, I think that starting from 2000 or 2001, let's say, after Putin came to power, they would be capable of that, yes. I mean, if they would understand that the time is running very short for that, if they would not delude themselves with a partnership with the Bush administration after 11th of September. And I just remind you that they believe that now we are coming into a new period of close cooperation in the United States. They even permitted the U.S. Army to use some of the airports, military airports, when it comes to the operation in Afghanistan, and so on and so on. So it was quite naive, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is it naive or stupid, too, or both? Maybe a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Just, you know, I have read lately, it's a mainstream book, nevertheless quite interesting. It was a book by Philip Short, a former BBC journalist, a biography of Vladimir Putin. Just trying to understand the background of the Russian president, not only of the Russian president, of the Russian elites, let's say political elites. The Russian elites, it's a paradox. But the Russian elites, I agree with Philip Short, because I had a lot of opportunities to talk to them. Of course, not to Vladimir Putin, but to, let's say, the low-level Russian elites or medium level. They were 100% oriented on the West, on the Western values, on the Western value systems, and so on and so on. Yes, so they were brought up actually by the West in the last decade of the Soviet Union. You know, looking at the West as a kind of model and so on. They were, in the 90s, of course, they were also following the path of the neoliberal transformation and so on. Alexander Dugin, who did not change his views. I mean, he was in the 90s, I perfectly remember, personally, I remember from 1999 when I visited Moscow that Alexander Dugin was in a kind of deep underground at that time. He was a deep anti-system opposition against the globalists who were in power in Russia. Yeah? And then it took a lot of time for the Russian elites to understand that their proposal and their idea to become the part of the global Western world will not be accepted by the globalists as such.
Definitely not on equal terms, not on equal partnership terms.
They wanted them as a colony, as a periphery, even not as a semi-periphery. If we use the theory of world system of Immanuel Wallerstein, but as a periphery, yes, a kind of base for mineral resources and so on.
Sure. No, it makes sense. I mean, it seems like Putin specifically, being those Germanophile and having spent time in Eastern Germany, almost took it personally. For instance, the situation with Merkel claiming that the Minsk agreements were used to buy time and militarize Ukraine. It seemed like he really, again, we're looking as outsiders, who knows what went on the inside, but it seemed to almost be this personal offense to him. But I'm not really sure. But I would like to shift gears and talk a little bit about your detention. I mean, we recently just got the news in the last 24 hours that the world's most famous political prisoner, Julian Assange, is being released, but he's being released under less than pleasant conditions. He had to admit to basically get a plea deal and count his time in Britain as time served to be able to finally leave. And so it's really interesting to hear your opinion about political detention. So for those who don't know, you did refer to the fact that you were initially detained in 2016. According to the internet, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it was because of these Russian connections. There's sort of different phrasings that you can find online. And so you were detained for approximately 3 years, which is a really long time, considering that it doesn't seem like they had any particular charges, because usually if there is a detention, charges would follow, criminal charges, and that did not happen. I would also like a correction, perhaps, or clarification. It says that different members of the Polish political establishment, both on sort of the official left and right, supported your release. And of course, to me, the most interesting document is the United Nations. You guys are welcome to go and Google the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. You can Google Mateusz's name. I have this PDF file. It's public right in front of me. Basically, they talk about, it's a really coherent summary of step-by-step events that have taken place, what the government claims were, what the lawyers' claims were, and basically they go ahead and conclude. So I'll quote this. The working group urges the government to ensure a full and independent investigation of the circumstances surrounding the arbitrary deprivation of liberty of Mr. Piskorski and to take appropriate measures against those responsible for the violation of his rights. Then it has several other paragraphs where it talks about sort of fundamental rights, a fundamental right to fair trial, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of association, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, they are urging Mateusz's release. So this is absolutely fascinating to talk to you as Assange is being released. So I'm really curious about your experience. You talked a little bit about how it came to be, and what is your status now? Just everything that you can tell us about this. It's definitely absolutely commendable that you managed to handle something that extreme. So,
well, first and foremost, I would like to voice, let's say, my full support for Julian Assange and other prisoners of conscience, and I'm really glad that he's free now. Even with all those conditions you mentioned, yes. Nevertheless, he's free, and hopefully he will still stay a kind of footprint for other independent journalists, a kind of model for independent journalism all over the world. I think he had definitely worse conditions than I did. I think that, as far as we know, he spent a lot of time, most of his time after the embassy of Ecuador, because that was also a kind of detention, actually, yes. So he spent 5 years in one of the worst prisons in the United Kingdom, I mean, Belmarsh, as far as we know. The conditions there are, I guess, definitely worse than the conditions in the prisons in which I spent 3 years. My situation was a little bit different because, well, here in Poland we still have a memory, a kind of collective memory of the existence of political prisoners. So, can you imagine that, for instance, when I was kept in one of the oldest prisons in Warsaw, in the Polish capital? It's now closed. It's a museum now, but I was kept there for several months. In the beginning, I got letters from former political prisoners from the 80s, for instance. Yeah? And they, wrote me that, well, please, we are supporting you. Well, we didn't know each other before. We hadn't known each other before, yes. But they just read in the media about me, and they wrote me the letters. So I had a huge support from them. They even recommended me the books from the prison library. That, well, check if the book is still there, so you could read that, yes. There was such a support, and there was also a huge support of several friends, not only from Poland, but from members of European Parliament, from different countries, from human rights activists from several countries. Yes. So I'm grateful, of course, for that support. My release was possible thanks to that support. The UN became interested in what's happening here in Poland, thanks to them, because they were writing several appeals, making several public statements and so on. But when you are there, you are just thinking about two things. I mean, on the very personal level, I can tell you that if you have chosen a kind of independent path in your life, yes, you have to consider that it might happen in the contemporary world. Yes, you have to remember that definitely things which are much worse happened in the past to the people who are trying to protect their independence, I mean, intellectual independence, political independence, and so on. You have to remember that at least our part of Europe is heavily experienced by different kinds of repressions. The building of the prison in which I was kept, I mean, the historical one in the center of Warsaw, was first used by the Tsarist Russia before the First World War. And then it was used as a prison, political prison as well, by the Second Polish Republic between the First and Second World War. Then it was used by the German Gestapo during the Second World War. And then it was again used by the communist Polish authorities after the Second World War, and continuously almost until now, because it was quite recently it was closed. So it's a kind of continuity. Yes, I mean, the problem, of course, is that regardless of this continuity of this conscience and tradition here in Poland, some people still live in a kind of illusion that there is no such a thing. I mean, the younger generations, that there is no such a thing as political prisoners. They are thinking about political prisoners and political repressions as a kind of, thing from the past, from the totalitarian times of the 20th century and so on. So they do not believe that it's possible now. That's making the things a little bit harder. But anyway, it was not so bad. Instead of talking about myself, about the conditions, as you see, I'm alive. I'm here and more or less able to speak about the conditions, and still more or less intellectually able to analyze the things I'm analyzing now. But I wanted to tell you that things are becoming worse. I mean, for the moment being, we have several political prisoners in Poland. We have Janusz Niedźwiecki, is one of human rights activists who went to Odessa to commemorate the victims of those people who were burned alive in Odessa by the Ukrainian nationalists back in 2014. Yes, he's in jail since more than 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Accused of espionage, because we are all being accused of espionage. I mean, if you voice dissident opinion, if you voice by any incident a kind of opinion which is more or less similar to the opinions voiced by the Russian side of this conflict, you are automatically treated as a spy. Yes, that of course reminds us Stalinist times, when it's enough to have some friends, contacts, or even an official cooperation. I had an official cooperation with several Russian NGOs. I didn't hide that. Yeah, we're cooperating, we're working together, we're putting our photos in social media with my Russian friends and partners, and we didn't try to hide anything. So anyway, if you have any citizen of Russia or Belarus among your friends, or citizens of Ukraine who are not on the right side of the current conflict, you can be accused of espionage anytime. And this is the case of Janusz Niedźwiecki. I mentioned you. Janusz Niedźwiecki used to, according to the prosecutors, used to cooperate. It's quite paradox. Cooperate with a pro-Russian politician from Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
Namely Viktor Medvedchuk.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And for that, the guy's in prison in detention since more than 3 years. So
no charges have been brought, it sounds like.
Yes, so they think that a pro-Russian, even if they claim that, if it's true that, let's say it's true that Medvedchuk is pro-Russian, okay. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, in our penal codex, they speak about the penalization of espionage, which means cooperation with foreign secret service, not with a pro-Russian politician from anywhere. And still the guy is in prison. Yes, we have a Spanish, by the way, not a Polish citizen, Spanish citizen, a journalist who is kept in prison since almost 2 years, if I'm right. Yes,
Gonzalez,
right. Pablo
Mm-hmm.
Gonzalez, yeah, also detained by the Polish secret police because he was just making some footage and reportage from the Polish-Ukrainian border, and
wow.
to show the truth about the situation of the refugees or immigrants and so on and so on. Yes, he's in jail. He has been detained. Yes.
Would you say the situation in Poland and maybe Central Europe at large is worse than the rest of the European Union? Do you think it varies from maybe Central Europe, including Germany, is worse than, let's say, other countries, or is it kind of difficult to make that assessment?
I think that it is worse than in Germany, definitely. I think that the model authoritarian country for Poland and for some other countries, which I will mention later, in our part of Europe, is Ukraine. I mean, it's Ukraine who started the repressions, yes, the political repression. So it's the first time, I say it ironically, of course, it's the first time since several decades that Poland is following an example from the East, not from the West.
Right.
So it's following the Ukrainian example. Yeah. Of course, it's following the Ukrainian example, but there are some other countries in European Union which are following the Ukrainian example as well. It's first and foremost the Baltic states. What's happening there? I have a lot of friends who are there in prison. Let me mention some of them. Algirdas Paleckis from Lithuania, who got sentenced for 6 years, I think, of imprisonment because he was just gathering some documents and materials for his book about the history of the Soviet time Vilnius. And about the judges who convicted Soviet army officers after the turmoils in 1991 in Vilnius. So for his analytic works, he was accused of espionage, of course, and imprisoned for 6 years. You have Professor Alexander Gaponenko from Latvia, a renowned historian and Russian-speaking historian. You have Sergei Syedenko from Estonia. A lot of other people there in Baltic states.
Well, sometimes we see media coverage saying that people literally came to put flowers on a monument and they get taken away with murky consequences for their actions in the Baltic.
So I would say that when it comes to freedom of speech and human rights, we, Poland, are among 4 worst countries in the European Union at the moment being, yes, together with the Baltic states.
Well, on this depressing note, do you think it's possible to come out of this dark time for Europe in general, for Europe to sort of redevelop more amicable relations with Russia, maybe in the future, and specifically for the Russian-Polish relations, considering our very complicated historic past?
That's a very difficult question because
it definitely is.
It's if Poland would be a sovereign country, I could answer you. Yes, that for instance, if there would be 2 competing political parties in Poland, one would be following, let's say, the Atlantic mode, and the second one would be following the Eurasian or more continental path, then I could tell you that, well, one of those parties has some chances to win the elections and to fundamentally change the external, the foreign policy of Poland. At the moment being, Central European countries are unfortunately not sovereign actors of international relations, but they are more or less following the path and the instructions coming from the Anglo-Saxon sphere, let's say, or from the war party in the Anglo-Saxon sphere, because I guess we have a lot of viewers and listeners who are from the US, and I perfectly know that, I mean, I'm not anti-American. I know that there are a lot of people in the United States who are supporting, let's say, the peace party, yeah? Or the multipolar party, in which America is one of the important poles in the multipolar world, of course. And it is supposed to be, it should be one of the important poles in the multipolar world. But it should be a pole which would be just one of several independent geopolitical centers of power and poles in the world. And they should forget about being not only a hegemon, but they should even forget about Monroe Doctrine, in my opinion. They should even forget about the idea that they can control the Western Hemisphere, because we have Latin America, South America, which is also a pole, and which sooner or later will become that pole. As we see in BRICS. I mean, the first letter of BRICS is Brazil, of course, yes. And so it is a pole.
Yeah, I mean, Brazil has been on the radar of the United States since early 19th century, and yeah, I mean, there was so many things that you were talking during your explanation about Ukraine and Poland and all that I was just relating to Brazilian things. I think we do need to have a full show just to talk about the relations of Poland and Ukraine with Latin America. But one of the things that called my attention, yes, of course, we had, for example, when you were mentioning the political temper in Ukraine during the Yanukovych and the Euromaidan later, the Yanukovych election and then the Euromaidan. I was remembering Brazil, but not during Dilma recent political coup against Dilma, but further a political coup against Fernando Collor, who was president twice before, once before Lula and then before Fernando Henrique. And back at the time, many people forget that during his presidency was exactly the moment where was created Mercosur, which nowadays we talk about BRICS as a very important piece on the multipolarity, but at the same time, it was happening with the Mercosur and European Union more or less in the same, and then African Union with Gaddafi thinking about the euro dinar, gold dinar. But my question, we talk a lot about history and recent past. I would like to understand. I've been to Warsaw once, a beautiful city, fantastic food, by the way. Um, eh, but I saw a fantastic city, a clean city, as I said, a fantastic food. I would like to understand how's the temper nowadays. I mean, Polish knows about recent and a little less recent history? Do they perceive? We kind of pass through this, but into the future, do you think that Poland could really be pushed into being the next Ukraine? I would try to summarize like that, because I just to finish my reasoning is I don't see Europe, Europeans, Italians, French going to war. I'm not talking about establishment pushing to it. I'm talking about people. I would like to understand the Polish temper on this, or how do you see this measurement that the people are they concerned? Are they willing to fight?
Those who are willing to fight are already
Are
dead.
already there.
Yes, or will be dead soon, I guess, because we have the mercenaries, of course, the Polish mercenaries there in Ukraine. Lately, we had an interview with one of them. We spoke with one of them, and let's say the level of his political consciousness is so low that it was terrible. Nevertheless, we tried to understand him, and just to give an opportunity for our audience to listen to his arguments. And the rest, well, fortunately, it would be quite hard technically to close the border. So if someone would drag us into the war, I mean the Western Polish border, if someone would like to drag us into the war, I'm pretty sure that most of the male population will leave the country, heading towards Germany and so on. We don't. I mean, we got used to living in more or less peaceful and even comfortable, stable conditions. Yes, here. I don't see any potential. Of course, you have the social media or internet warriors claiming that they are going to capture Moscow and so on. Yes. But usually, when they see, I mean, for instance, the mercenaries, yes, there were a lot of mercenaries, or Polish mercenaries, who escaped from Ukraine when they saw the real face of the war there. Yeah? So that is not a game, because a lot of people of younger generations, of course, we do not remember the Second World War. Very few people are left and still live alive from the times of the Second World War. I mean, the veterans who could tell us about the real history of how the war looks. Yes. And we have a kind of war romanticism here in Poland, unfortunately, because basically it's also it's a very interesting phenomena, because it's the case with the mass culture. You had lately in the recent years, you had a lot of popular TV series and movies, romanticizing the war as such. showing that they are, clean heroes, warriors, killing dozens of enemies, and so on and so on. That was, by the way, also a sign of Americanization of the Polish culture, which used to be a very rich culture, because before we had, some classics, also in our Polish cinema, who made films about some film directors who made films about the war, showing the cruelty of the war. Yes.
I remember in Brazil, Polish movies were, in the cool terrain. They were not showing in the big movies, but the cool sphere of people were watching a lot of Polish movies.
That was in the past. So unfortunately, because of this Americanization of the Polish film industry, I think, of course, it was a kind of conscious metapolitical cultural activity. The people don't have the image of the war, of the real war, of what war is. Fortunately, in this case, we have several millions of Ukrainian immigrants now in Poland, and of course we talk to them. Of course our people, Polish people, talk to them, listen to their stories, look at the pictures they send to them, and so on. And I think that maybe. And that's quite good for the level of consciousness of Polish people about the war. Yes, they have the witnesses coming here from Ukraine.
Well, social media as well, I think, is so just overflowing with really graphic violence that it's kind of hard to idealize the process when you see probably the worst thing you've ever seen in your life. So I think that's another contributor. Marcelo, do you have a wrap-up question? Because I think after we asked about the future of multipolarity, it's kind of hard to top that question.
No, I mean, I think I'm going to hold my questions for perhaps another opportunity that we have, because we've been over the edge for about almost half an hour already. And so I would like to thank you for the participation, and also for getting us a little bit of the sense of what's going on to Polish. That for me, it's a major point to watch at this moment, is the Polish temper. As you said, I really do believe that Polish is suffering more than perhaps the Central Europe, and even as far as Iberic, Portugal and Spain, because it's again in the curtain. It's in the Polish corridor, as we used to say.
Well, the Polish corridor is a chance, from the geopolitical point of view. I will give you just a little portion of optimism.
Just a small one.
Thank you. That's always
very Slavic.
You know that I'm the most establishment commentator here, one of the most anti-establishment commentators here in Poland nowadays, and I kind of enfant terrible of the Polish public sphere. Anyway, I can tell you that since a very long time, I'm quite glad with the Polish president, who has just come back from Beijing, being there within a state visit, and talking about the need to recreate or renew the idea of One Belt, One Road initiative. If he talks about that, of course, he doesn't mention Russia in that context, but if you look at the map, there's no such a thing as Polish-Chinese border, so you need to get it right with Russia anyway. So hopefully, and I'm talking about that hope, little hope, hopefully China and maybe the economic rationalism and pragmatism will prevail over the war ideology, and hopefully we'll save Europe. But as I'm stressing that this is a very, very small chance for that. Anyway, I wanted to give you a little bit of optimism for the end of this fascinating conversation.
I think
That is
I,
fantastic.
as a mostly Slav, I'm used to the gallows humor, but Marcelo might be a little bit shocked by the prevalence of pessimism, with a little bit of a cherry on top with of
Oh,
optimism.
I'm Brazilian. I'm very. We have something in Brazil that we say we laugh so we don't cry.
Oh, good one.
So
Yes, yes.
yeah,
Well, thank you so much, Mateusz. This was extremely elucidating, having you as a witness to, all the events that we've been watching in the media over the past decade. It's really, really educational for me personally, and I think for our audience as well. We would love to have you back. I did not ask you about intermarium, which was kind of another geopolitical concept. So maybe next time we can have you back and do a follow-up interview, of course, if you're available.
Of course, I'm available for such interesting conversations with you anytime. So I hope I'll be back soon if you invite me. With pleasure. Thank you for today's conversation. I think we have all learned a little bit from each other, listening to each other here, and I hope we'll also learn something from the comments of our viewers as well.
yeah. So everybody, don't forget to comment, like, share, subscribe. All the drills for social media. Otherwise, the channels do not grow. Remember to join the Press of Mass Destruction, which is the ImprensaDeDestruiçãoEmMassa, which is my channel. Remember to follow Nina on her channel, and I will put all the links on the description for Mateusz Piskorski social and channel, so you can follow. There's subtitles on the videos,
And there is an
YouTube.
English version too, so that would be helpful.
Yes, English
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Russian, even Russian. Yeah.
And
Exactly.
we will see you in the next episode. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
See you. Bye bye.